Hello, John.
Hello, Oliver.
Now we're going to talk about pandemics and we're going to talk about the coronavirus and how it affects housing in Ireland and the lack of planning by our government. I think our government and governments around the world have let people down when it comes to the pandemics and coronavirus. One thing you don't hear in the media, I haven't heard it mentioned yet, is how the pandemic will affect the homeless and how you can protect the homeless so they don't infect other people with the pandemic, the virus. So what do you suggest for the...
Well, without a doubt, it's up to the local authority because in whatever place, a city, that there is an amount of homeless, and Dublin is particularly prone to that particular problem. And I think, funny enough, the ones that are homeless are mostly Irish, because unfortunately the Irish, there's a drug problem and an alcohol problem in this country. And the people that are sleeping on the streets and rough are, generally speaking, suffering from the effects of alcohol and a combination of drugs as well. They're not able to seemingly help themselves because they're out of it. But the trouble is that they band together, and because of the unsatisfactory way that they're living on the street, they could easily spread among themselves this virus, this coronavirus, and then ultimately affect the people in these places where they're often sleeping overnight in these charitable organisations that supply stuff for them. I think I said it before in a previous video that these people have severe psychological problems. There was a time there was psychiatric hospitals that cater for a lot of these people. But now they're kind of, I think, a thing of the past. And these are out in society and are not able to operate as in society. Or in life, they lack the skills or the whatever it is they lack. They need help. So it would be up to the Department of Health. They call it the HSE, and really I think it seems to cover a multitude, but I think the Department of Health, the health authorities, would want to take proactive action, immediate action, to take these people off the street and put them into some kind of isolation or some kind of where there was care, nursing care or some other kind of care, to sort of, first of all, give them no drugs or any other sort of thing, so as they can be weaned off this. That's number one. It's about the worst treatment that you can give a drug addict is what they call this methadone treatment, which is more drugs, and it hasn't just diluted the whole time. You want to get them away from any kind of drugs and dependence, but they need education, God help them, so they'd want to do that and bring them into institutions where there's some kind of help for them to get them back on the straight and narrow.
A friend of mine, he works, his job basically is to go around the city cleaning up the back streets and general maintenance around the city. But he said to me that he says, what you see on the street every day, right? You see people begging on Common Bridge and outside Easton's and Cleary's and a few more places up in Grafton Street. He says what you see is only a fraction. He says what you actually see in the back streets, he says up the back laneways, you see people that are almost blue in the face. He says there's loads of people, he says drug addicts up back ways and they're out of it.
Correct.
That's what he told me,
Yeah, well you see, this so it's as a matter of fact, we talk about the virus, the coronavirus, but there is also a virus affecting a lot of people that are drug addicts and out of it. And really, it's up to the authorities to take these matters serious and to, for goodness sake, deal with this social problem and stop talking about it or analysing it to death. Action is what's required.
Absolutely.
There's no point in talking about something. You need action, and you or I can't do anything about it. Well, I'm paying income tax still now on a small pension, And it went up there in the recent budget again, so my private pension that I paid into is becoming less, and it wasn't it's not high, it's not a big one, but nonetheless, and now they're whipping €74 off yours truly, and I'm after paying tax when I was walking through the nose.
Yeah.
50, what am I talking about? 50, 60, 65% on the modest salary. Yeah. I spoke about that before, but where's that going? Who's that helping? I prefer to see people, especially poor, unfortunate Irish people that have become drug addicts and dependent on substances other than ordinary food to live. They have psychiatric problems and they need to be helped.
Right.
So there's no point in closing hospitals when when there's a percentage of people that's not able to cope.
That's it. The other side of it as well, okay, it's the housing for ordinary healthy people that had jobs, before the pandemic struck. These people now, they've no wages and they can't pay rent. The rents, as we know, in Dublin are sky high in Ireland.
Sky high is right.
Daft is the place where you rent properties or get
That's
properties.
right.
They said there's a 64% increase in rental property supply, and that's a lot of that's to do with Airbnb because we have no tourists now, so the tourism has collapsed.
Correct.
Okay, because that's what happens in a pandemic. But the government doesn't seem to have any plan other than say we'll give the people 200 and I think they said in the paper €203 a week. Okay, so if somebody's rental for a room is $600 a month.
That's just what I call barbaric. That's too exorbitant. People that are working in business or organisations where now they have no wages or no income coming in because they're not on the dole. People on the dole are people that never worked and are dependent on the state. They won't be affected that much. Mm-hmm. But the people that actually were working and providing to the economy in ways with taxes and all the rest of it they were paid, now they haven't got any income. So it behoves the people that have rented accommodation because it'll be a question of supply and demand. There won't be as much demand now for their sites, but still some people are renting, and so there'd want to be something done about that. But this government, probably a lot of the members of that Dáil probably own property, so they're looking after their own interests, not looking after the people.
Absolutely.
And that's what they should. As a matter of fact, on that very subject, with the fragmented state of the parties and unable to form a government, and did you ever think you'd see the day that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael couldn't form a government with such the amount of TDs they had? Now they have none. And rather they can't form a government themselves. But I think we need a national government that will be there for the good of the people, not for their own agenda. Yeah. That's number one. That's an important suggestion for to deal with these issues that we're just outlining.
The problem is, right, if people have no wages, right, if they have only got the €203 and that's all they have to pay their rent. I mean, the government puts on this PR thing in the Irish Independent and all the newspapers that they're going to put in legislation, they're going to force landlords and banks to do all this kind of thing. But of course, all this kind of thing should have been in place already.
Correct.
There was no action plan, right? No. So as a result, what's happened now is our tourism has collapsed, right? People are out of work. The people that were renting and they were only on €400 or €500 a week, right? Those people are now leaving the country in a mass exodus back to France, Spain, Germany, America, Canada, all the different countries. They're all leaving now. And so that means there's major disruption on the economy because all these people had to be trained to do the jobs they were doing, whether they were working in bars, restaurant, or whatever they were working, right? And that results in a lot lower rent, obviously, which is a good thing, okay? But it causes major disruption for people.
Well, you see, this was the agenda of this government, is still in there, this Fine Gael government, and probably other governments, to have what they call free movement, this EU nonsense. And so we had an influx, percentage-wise, higher than any other country. 15 to 20% of the population, as far as I understand now, is not born in this country. Now, that is a recipe for disaster. The first thing to do is to make sure that your own Irish citizens are employed, and that jobs are not done or taken from them because the wages or the salaries for these workers that have come from all over the globe, as far as I see, and giving them the jobs, and when they're not actually able to communicate in the language of the country. In other words, they're driving buses and you see them here, there and yonder, and you might well be talking to the wall. They don't have command of the English or anything, only pidgin stuff. A 4-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old child would have more. So this is a recipe for disaster, and this is an example of it. I heard this nonsense that, well, Irish people now won't do these jobs. They did them before, and there's no reason why they wouldn't do them. So the policies that these governments that were in power for the last 20, 30, 40 years or more, their policies have not been for the good of the people.
Well, we've had over the last 300 years, we've had I think it's about 10 pandemics. I mean, the biggest pandemic we've had in recent times, of course, is HIV, which is a different story. But there's 36 million people dead from HIV since the early 80s. Okay, but we won't go into that. But the thing is that we have to be. What spreads pandemics and viruses, okay, is actually tourism. Okay, so we do need tourism. So we need a way to handle a pandemic, handle it appropriately, have a set of plans in place, and of course our government doesn't, and the government before that didn't either. So the governments are failing the people.
Well, the trouble is, you see, that's about pandemics, but that's the Department of Health needs to be doing that, or the health authorities. But no, I was just talking now, very important, about the fact that what they did as regards the economic situation. We're talking about all the ones now that have left. And there's a lot that hasn't left, because I see them around. And the way they ran the economy, they didn't run for the good of the people. Pandemics is another matter, a very important matter that they need to take steps about. But if you have pursued policies to the detriment of your own citizens, which they did, even changing the education system to suit ones that have come into the country, and they made thousands and thousands of them Irish citizens that had absolutely not much interest in being an Irish citizen, except for when they were, then they could travel to other countries. So this free travel now is not going to be as prevalent as it was before. So hotels now might have to cut down on staff, because they mightn't have as many tourists for the next couple of years as what they had, because people often, there's an after effect from these things. Even when it's over, things don't go back immediately the same they were, because this is a world business, so it's affecting every country. So the people won't be that anxious to be travelling for a few years in my book. So it's going to be a very serious occasion, and it tells me that businesses that depended on a lot of foreign workers, they'd want to rethink their situation, and likewise the government, they'd want to rethink their strategy. That's why I mentioned there should be a national government to look after the interests of the Irish people, and solutions along health lines and every other line for that.
Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you very much, Oliver.